March 1982. A flatbed truck rolled up Robert Keller's driveway in rural Iowa, and his entire world was about to collapse. The man climbing out wasn't delivering parts. He wasn't there to help. Kyle Mitchell had one job that Tuesday morning: take Robert's only tractor and leave him with nothing. The papers in Kyle's hand said he had every legal right to do it. Robert owed $847 to Benson Farm Supply, 4 months overdue, and in the fine print he'd never read, he'd given them permission to take everything. But here's what Kyle didn't know yet. Here's what nobody could have predicted that morning. 20 years later, Robert would own Kyle's land. And the dealer who sent Kyle? Robert would own his land too. Every acre they'd lost, every dream they'd destroyed for themselves, Robert would farm it all. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, Robert had to survive the next 72 hours. "You can't take it," Robert said, blocking the shed door. Kyle was bigger, younger, stronger, but something in Robert's eyes made him pause, something desperate and determined that even a repo man recognized. This wasn't just a tractor. This was a man's last stand. "Give me until Friday," Robert begged. 3 days. Let me work something out." Kyle looked at this farmer standing between him and an $847 piece of collateral, made a decision that probably saved Robert's life, and said yes. Friday noon. If Benson didn't call by then, Kyle was coming back with the sheriff. No exceptions. Robert stood in his driveway watching the dust settle, holding papers that could end everything, with exactly 3 days to find money he didn't have. Here's what you need to understand about Robert Keller. This wasn't supposed to happen to him. He was the careful one, the conservative one, the farmer who did everything right. In 1971, he'd bought 380 acres for $161,500, working 2 jobs for 3 years to save the down payment, farming during the day, working night shift at the Firestone plant in Des Moines until midnight, up at 5 a.m. to do it all again. His wife Mary kept the books, raised 2 kids, never complained about the 70-hour weeks. That's how you build something real. He'd bought that 1958 Farmall 560 tractor for $3,800 cash. 13 years old, 4,200 hours on it, paint faded but mechanically sound. No financing, no debt. That was Robert's rule. One debt at a time. Pay off the land first, then think about equipment. Through the 1970s, it worked. Corn prices stayed decent. Land values climbed. By 1980, he'd paid down $39,500 in principal through extra payments whenever possible. He was winning. Slowly, carefully, but winning. Then 1981 arrived and changed everything. The Federal Reserve crushed inflation by raising interest rates to 5%. The grain embargo devastated exports. Corn prices collapsed from $3.50 per bushel to $2. 10. Land values that had been climbing for a decade suddenly dropped 40, 50, 60%. Robert's income in 1981 was half what it had been in 1980. He grossed maybe $42,000 farming 380 acres. After expenses, he netted $8,000. His land payment alone was $1,288 per year. Do the math. He was $4,188 short just to make the land payment, not counting living expenses, not counting anything else. He drained his savings in January and February. By summer, he was 6 months behind, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. That's when the 1958 Farmall 560 started dying. October 1981. Carburetor shot, hydraulic hoses leaking, steering linkage loose. The tractor needed $847 in parts, and Robert needed that tractor to harvest his crop. No tractor meant no harvest. No harvest meant the bank would take everything. He didn't have $847, didn't have $400, didn't have $100. The parts manager at Benson Farm Supply offered credit. 90-day terms, pay by January 15th, no interest. Robert hated credit, hated owing money, but he needed those parts or everything ended right there. He signed the credit application, 3 pages of fine print he never read, took the parts home, installed them himself, finished his harvest. 90 days passed. He still couldn't pay. Every dollar from selling his crop went to the bank to avoid foreclosure. February passed. Still couldn't pay. March arrived, and that's when Charles Benson made his decision. Charles owned the dealership. Second-generation dealer, 58 years old, watching his business implode. Equipment sales had collapsed. He had $143,000 in outstanding receivables from farmers who couldn't pay. His cash flow was catastrophic. He looked at Robert Keller's account. $847, now 60 days overdue. His lawyer hesitated. Charles, are you sure? It's only $847, the cost of repossession. I don't care, Charles interrupted. I need to send a message. People need to know I'll enforce collection. Send Mitchell. That's what brought Kyle to Robert's farm that Tuesday morning. That's what gave Robert 3 days to find money he didn't have. Wednesday, Robert called everyone. His brother Tom in Cedar Rapids just bought a house, tapped out. His father-in-law Frank just bought a car, no spare cash. Old army buddies, cousins, high school friends. Nobody had $850 to lend a struggling farmer. Wednesday evening, Robert sat at the kitchen table with Mary, going through everything they owned. The truck needed it. The furniture, maybe $800 total at a garage sale. Mary's mother's china, sentimental value only. Thursday morning, Mary went to the bedroom and came back with a small velvet box. Inside was a 2-carat diamond ring, white gold setting, beautiful piece. Her mother had left it to her when she died in 1979, her mother's engagement ring, the only valuable thing her mother had ever owned. Mary wore it every single day. Sell this, Mary said, putting the box on the table. Robert looked at his wife. Mary, no, that's your mother's ring. It's just a ring, Mary said, and Robert could hear what it cost her to say that. He could see the tears she was holding back. This farm is our life, our future, our kids' future. Take the ring, sell it, save the farm. Friday morning, Robert drove to Des Moines. 3 jewelry stores, 3 offers, $750, $825, $925. He took the $925, got cash, drove straight to Benson Farm Supply. 10:47 a.m., 13 minutes before Kyle Mitchell was supposed to show up with the sheriff. Robert walked into Charles Benson's office and put $900 bills and one $25 bill on Charles's desk. That's $925. $847 pays my debt. The other $78 is for the trouble I caused. We're square. Charles stared at the money. Where'd you get this? That's my business. The debt is paid. I want a receipt and I want the lien released. As Robert was leaving, Charles called after him. You're barely hanging on, Keller. This farm crisis is just getting started. You should sell out while you still can. Get something for your land before it's worthless. Robert kept walking, got in his truck, drove home. When Mary asked if it worked, if the debt was paid, he just nodded, couldn't speak, gave her the receipt. She looked at it, put it in the drawer with their other important papers. They never talked about the ring again. But here's where the story gets interesting. Robert survived the 1980s farm crisis. Barely, but he survived. By keeping equipment expenses at absolute minimum, by maintaining what he had, by making do with less, he got through. Charles Benson's dealership didn't survive. By 1983, losing money every month. By 1984, desperate. By August 1985, Benson Farm Supply closed its doors after 43 years in business. Charles lost everything. The building, the inventory, his house, his savings, all gone to the banks. Charles had to take a job selling insurance in Des Moines. He was 62 years old, had never worked for anyone but himself, made $32,000 a year, a fraction of his former income. Worked until he was 75 because he couldn't afford to retire. By 1991, Robert paid off his land completely, 20 years exactly from when he bought it. 0 debt. And because he'd survived by keeping costs at absolute minimum, because he'd never taken on equipment debt, he'd accumulated $95,000 in savings. Spring 1995. Robert saw a notice in the newspaper. Farmland auction, bank-owned properties. One parcel jumped out, 280 acres in Nevada Township. Good land. Starting bid. $800 per acre. Robert did some research and discovered whose land it had been. Charles Benson, the dealer who'd tried to repo his tractor in 1982, the man who'd told him to sell out while he could. Charles had bought that 280 acres in 1979 at the peak of the market, paid $2,200 per acre, total price $616,000. Put down $30,000, financed $586,000 at an adjustable rate. When rates spiked and the dealership failed, Charles couldn't make payments on anything. The bank foreclosed in 1987. The land had been sitting on the bank's books for 8 years with no buyers. Robert called the bank. "I'd like to make an offer. I can pay cash. Would you take $700 per acre?" 3 days later. "Mr. Keller will accept $700 per acre, $196,000 cash." Robert bought Charles Benson's foreclosed land, the man who'd sent the repo man to take his tractor. 13 years later, Robert owned Charles's land. But wait, it gets better. 2002. Another opportunity. Kyle Mitchell, the repo man who'd shown up at Robert's farm in 1982, had tried farming himself, bought 160 acres in 1984 with money he'd saved doing repo work. Thought he could make it. Couldn't. Foreclosed in 1989, Robert bought it at auction, $900 per acre, $144,000 cash. Now he owned 820 acres. His original 380, plus the 280 that had been Charles Benson's, plus the 160 that had been Kyle Mitchell's. The dealer and the repo man who tried to take his tractor in 1982 had both lost their land. Robert had bought it, owned it, farmed it. Think about the irony for a second. In March 1982, these two men had all the power. Charles Benson sent the repo order. Kyle Mitchell had the legal papers and the flatbed truck. Robert was desperate, begging for 3 more days. 20 years later, Robert owned their land. They had nothing. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. 1996. Robert was farming his expanded 660 acres when he ran into Charles at the grocery store in Nevada. First time they'd seen each other in years. Charles was 73, looked older, stooped shoulders, trembling hands, the look of a man defeated by life. He was picking up prescriptions at the pharmacy counter. They made eye contact. Charles looked away quickly. Robert walked over. "Charles." "Robert." Charles's voice was barely above a whisper. "How are you doing?" Charles laughed bitterly. People were starting to look. "You know how I'm doing. You bought my land. You know exactly how I'm doing." Robert hadn't known Charles knew. "I bought it from the bank, fair price." "You're farming my land, Robert. Land my father bought in 1954. Land I bought in 79, thinking I was being smart. And you're farming it because I tried to collect $847 you owed me." "You tried to repo my tractor," Robert said quietly. "For $847 in parts I couldn't pay because the economy collapsed." Charles's hands were shaking. "My dealership was dying. Farmers owed me $143,000 in uncollectible debts. I had to do something." "You sent a message," Robert said, "and I survived. And you didn't. That's not my fault, Charles. That's just what happened." Charles stared at him for a long moment. Then quietly, "You sold your wife's ring to pay me. Helen told me later. The bookkeeper. She said Mary came in one day, saw the ring was gone. Mary told her you sold her mother's diamond ring to pay the debt." Robert didn't respond. "I didn't know that when I sent Mitchell," Charles continued. "Didn't know what it cost you." He trailed off. "If I'd known, would it have changed anything?" Charles thought about that. "No, probably not. I was desperate. Desperate people do desperate things." They stood there in the grocery store, 2 old farmers, one who'd survived, one who hadn't. "I'm sorry," Charles said finally. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry I tried to take your tractor." Robert nodded. Charles turned to leave, then stopped. "You earned it. The land. You earned it by surviving when I didn't. That's farming. The land goes to whoever can hold it." Robert watched him leave, never saw him again. Charles died 15 years later, and Robert didn't go to the funeral. 2005. Robert decided to find out what happened to Kyle Mitchell. He tracked Kyle down in Omaha, working at a Kellogg plant. Drove there one Saturday, knocked on the door of a small duplex in South Omaha. Kyle answered, didn't recognize Robert at first. Kyle Mitchell? Yeah. Robert Keller, you tried to repo my tractor in 1982. Kyle's face changed as the memory clicked. Jesus, that was 23 years ago. What do you want? Just wanted to talk. The duplex was small, worn, furniture from Goodwill. This was not a man thriving. I bought your land, Robert said. Kyle nodded slowly. I heard. 160 acres near Nevada. I bought it in '84 thinking I could farm, lost it in '89. Why'd you try farming? Kyle was quiet. Because I hated the repo work. Hated taking people's equipment. Saw what it did to families. Thought maybe I could be a farmer instead of the guy who destroyed farmers. Turns out I wasn't any good at it. Nobody was good at it in the '80s, Robert said. The ones who survived just had less debt. You survived. I came within 3 days of taking your only tractor. If I'd taken it, you would have lost everything just like I did. Kyle looked at his coffee. I think about that sometimes. The people whose equipment I took. Most of them lost their farms. A couple guys killed themselves after I took their equipment. His voice broke. I was just doing my job, but I helped destroy people. And then when I tried farming myself, I failed. Maybe that was karma. You bought at the wrong time, Robert said. Bought in '84 when prices were still falling. If you'd waited until '92, bought at the bottom, you might have made it. I paid $1,400 an acre. You bought my land for what? $900? Yeah. Lost $80,000 on a 160 acres in 5 years. That was everything I'd saved. Gone. When Robert left, Kyle walked him to the door. You know what's funny? In '82, I had all the power. I had the papers, had the authority, could take your tractor and destroy you. You were desperate, begging for 3 days. Now look at us. You own 820 acres. I work at a cereal factory. Power shifts fast. Robert thought about that on the drive home. Power shifts fast. 2017. Robert retired at 78. His son Michael took over for a few years, then decided farming wasn't for him. Robert sold the entire 820 acres for $4,200 per acre. Total sale price, $3,144,000. The farm he'd almost lost in 1982, over $847 in unpaid parts bills, had grown into a $3 million operation. Let's do the final math because this is where it gets absolutely wild. Robert bought Charles Benson's 280 acres for $196,000 in 1995, sold them in 2017 for $176,000. Profit, $980,000 on land Charles had originally bought for $616,000 and lost for nothing. Robert bought Kyle Mitchell's 160 acres for $184,000 in 2002, sold them in 2017 for $672,000. Profit, $528,000 on land Kyle had bought for $224,000 and lost for nothing. Total profit on the foreclosed lands, $508,000. Robert Keller died in his sleep in January 2019 at age 82. At his funeral, over 400 people attended. His son Michael gave the eulogy. In March 1982, they tried to take Dad's tractor for $847 in unpaid parts bills. They sent a repo man with legal papers and a flatbed truck. Dad had 3 days to come up with the money or lose everything. He sold my grandmother's diamond ring, paid the $847, saved the tractor, saved the farm. Michael paused, looking out at the crowd. 20 years later, Dad bought their land. The dealer who tried to repo the tractor, Dad bought his 280 acres at foreclosure auction. The repo man who came to take it, Dad bought his 160 acres. The people who tried to destroy us lost everything. Dad survived and ended up owning what they'd lost. He looked down at his notes. Dad never talked about it much. He didn't see it as revenge. He just saw it as survival. He survived because he didn't have equipment debt. They didn't survive because they did. Simple as that. At the reception, Robert's wife, Mary, 91 years old, sat quietly listening to stories. Someone asked her about the ring, about selling her mother's diamond to save the farm. "I've never regretted it," Mary said. "That ring was pretty, but it was just a thing. The farm was our life. I'd make the same choice today." She smiled slightly. "And in the end, we did fine without it. Better than fine." Robert made sure of that. The story of Robert Keller became legend among farmers. The dealer who tried to repo a tractor for $847 lost a $616,000 farm. The repo man who came to take it lost his own $224,000 farm. The farmer they tried to destroy ended up owning both properties. Not through revenge, not through cunning, through survival, through making $847 payments when it seemed impossible, through farming with old equipment, through avoiding debt, through lasting one more year, then another, until suddenly everyone who tried to break you was gone, and you were still standing. The John Deere dealer tried to repo Robert Keller's Farmall for unpaid bills in March 1982. 20 years later, he owned their lands. Survival is its own reward. Sometimes the best revenge is just not going bankrupt. And sometimes, if you can hold on just a little bit longer than everyone else, the land they lost becomes yours. If this story about Robert Keller's incredible journey from near bankruptcy to a $3 and $4 million empire inspired you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more incredible true stories of survival, triumph, and the unexpected ways life can turn around. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another story like this one.